When I was in my second year of college, I heard of this thing called Facebook. It was open to only students of certain colleges at that particular time, and quickly my friends all joined, and so did I. So this was in the very early days, so all that your Facebook profile had was your picture, your name, some basic personal information like a few sentences, maybe a paragraph, no videos at all. Joining Facebook changed my experience of walking around campus. It changed my relationships. A person and I would see each other in person, and we would know things about each other that we had shared only on the Facebook platform. We'd never had a conversation. So fast forward to last week, 20 years later. The founder of Facebook, along with his professional contemporaries who had other social media platforms, all of these business people are being interviewed by our elected officials in a formal hearing. The reason is their products are under serious suspicion of being very dangerous to children. Now let's go back to my time in college. So in my third year of college, I got a cell phone for the first time. When I got my phone, my friends were excited because now we'd be able to text. It turns out that this technology, more so than Facebook, changed my experience of walking around campus, and it changed my relationships. So Facebook was on my computer, which, not a laptop, stayed in my dorm room. But the cell phone, it was with me all the time. Okay, so now fast forward again to the present. Actually, this was a couple months ago. I got a text from my sister. Now, it wasn't the green text, it was the blue text. You know what I'm talking about, the blue text? So I was like, oh my gosh, it's the blue text. She finally got a smartphone. Oh, indeed, she resisted that technology to an extent that most of us cannot fathom. So what was it that changed? She gave birth to her first child, the first grandchild in the family, a very big deal. So she accepted a smartphone as a gift from a friend so she could take pictures and send pictures of her son more easily. So now I have baby nephew pictures a couple times a week, even though I only see him every month or two, and I certainly have no complaints about that. But technology, specifically communication technology and social media, affects our lives and it affects our relationships. Its effects are positive, its effects are negative, and its effects are unpredictable. So now, let's go to this week's Parsha, Mishpatim. Now, Mishpatim means laws, but it refers to a particular type of law. Rabbi Menachem Schrader explains it by saying that the Torah's commandments are divided into two categories. There's chukim, or a chok. It's a commandment whose reasons are not evident. And then there's mishpatim, or a mishpat, a commandment whose rationale we can perceive. So our Torah portion this week focuses on laws for which we can, when we try, understand their rationale. And it includes an instruction about Shabbat. It says, 6 days you shall do your work, but on the seventh day you shall cease from labor, in order that your ox and your donkey may rest, and that your Jewish and non-Jewish workers may be refreshed. So this seems pretty straightforward. 1 day out of 7, we may not labor, so that our work animals and our employees can have a day off. Now, as explained in this week's parashah, the point of Shabbat is to give rest to our workers, whether or not we want ourselves the day off, whether or not we're on track to meet our budget or satisfy our customers. We can perceive the rationale of this mishpat, of this law. It's important to give our workers a day off. It makes sense. But now let's think about last week's parashah, which contains our 10 commandments, and it gives us a bit of a different instruction about Shabbat. It says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your children, your workers, your animals, and your non-Jewish workers, because in 6 days God made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. Now, these two versions of this instruction are a little bit different. Last week's parasha does agree with this week's parasha in that it says both say that our workers and our animals need 1 day off every week. But this instruction from the 10 Commandments tells us and our families to rest as well. And also, we have to remember Shabbat. And further, we have to keep Shabbat holy. Unlike this week's parasha, last week's parasha connects Shabbat to God's creation of the world. So taking a day off from work every week, whether or not we want to, and somehow connecting that action to God's creation of the world in 6 days and resting on the 7th, that's not exactly a mishpat. The rationale for that is not quite something we can readily perceive. Okay, so now let's take a step back again, or a step forward maybe, to our topic of technology where we started today. So we need to go back to that topic of technology to ask the question, what exactly is work as opposed to rest? Now, the rabbis of the Talmud answered that question in accordance with the technology of their time. They articulated a list of 39 actions that were prohibited on Shabbat. This list includes some actions that many of us still do every day, like tying a knot or carrying an object from one place to another. But it also includes actions that very few of us do every day anymore, like spinning wool, capturing deer, and harvesting crops. So what, if anything, does this answer from the Talmud mean for us today, when our understanding of work is so different, when our understanding of technology is so different? Some of you know that I have taught Jewish studies to high school students. In my conversations with students about their experience of Shabbat and holidays, I was surprised that some of them would really emphasize their relationship with their phones. Even though they wouldn't follow every single detail of observance that Jewish law technically required, they were conscious of their phone. And for these students, staying off their phone was part of how they connected to family and friends on Shabbat or Yom Tov. But the 39 actions Talmudically prohibited on Shabbat don't include charging one's smartphone or texting one's family. So what does today's Jewish law say about Shabbat and our phones? Looking into this, I found an article written in 2013 by Aryeh Younger. He speaks about a custom from his modern Orthodox community that's apparently called half Shabbat. I had not heard of this before, maybe some of you had. Now, apparently this is the practice of observing some of the halachot, some of the Jewish laws of Shabbat, but not others. So the people who do this will, for example, have a traditional Shabbat dinner and walk to shul for services the next morning, but they'll still text and go on social media. So for them, using this communication technology doesn't feel like work. It feels like socializing. Now, unfortunately, there has been no rabbinic permission issued to approve such use of the phone on Shabbat. Now, but what about using the phone for other reasons? Well, first and foremost, it is absolutely permitted to use a phone to save a life. Calling for help in a crisis is pikuach nefesh, preserving life, and this has the highest value in Jewish law. But using the phone for other reasons? Unfortunately, for phone lovers across the Jewish world, that's not quite approved. One might think that the reason for this is that the phone is an electronic device, but that's actually not quite it. The reason is that using a cell phone violates the Talmudic prohibition of writing on Shabbat. When we send a text, when we make a phone call, when we open an app, we create a record of that action. And creating a record is precisely what the rabbis of the Talmud had in mind when they said we can't write on Shabbat. But there's another reason for us to put away our phones on Shabbat, at least for a couple of hours, with, apologies to the rabbis of the Talmud, a reason that I think is more compelling. And so I'll give you an example. Just a few days ago, this past Sunday, I was here teaching a class. I was joined by members of our community in person and virtually, and we had a lovely session of Torah discussion, the Hybridiverse, which, as you all know, is one of my favorite places to hang out, the Hybridiverse. As always, our session time ended before our flow of ideas had stopped, and I was still speaking with members of our community in person as people were pushing in their chairs and putting away the Humashim. And then I got a text. It was one of those time-sensitive ones, too, about something that needed to happen right then and there. And so I stopped what I was doing in the middle of those beautiful interactions to write back and respond. This was also right before the rainstorms had started, so all those who braved the weather to come in person were quite eager to go back to their homes dry and safe. And so by the time I had finished texting, I looked up and realized that the room was emptying out, and the conversations I had been enjoying were now over, concluded abruptly by me when I pulled out my phone and started texting back intently. Now, I think many of us, when we're really being honest with ourselves, are aware of how distracted we can be by our phones. And I think many of us, including myself, make conscious efforts to put our phones away during important meetings and special conversations so we can be fully present with those around us. On Shabbat, as a community, because we are Jewish, we have a good excuse, we have a good reason to put away our phones and be fully present with one another. We all know that we like to be together. We've all made special effort, whether we're here in person or virtually, to do specifically this, to stop everything we're doing and be together at this appointed time, at shul. With just one text, with just one notification, we all know this, we've all experienced this. We can be torn out of the here and now as if the people in front of us weren't even there. On Shabbat, we can take a break from this experience. We can instead feel what it's like to slow down a bit, to stop our multitasking, to make some extra space for the thoughts in our mind and the people around us. We might even be able to go for a few hours in a row, while awake, without looking at a screen. So this Shabbat, as we read the Torah's rule that we should rest one day a week, let's reflect not on the letter of the law, but on its spirit. Let's remember that the technologies that we create have the power to save life and also have the power to change it in ways we don't intend and in ways we would never expect. Let's take the next few minutes, or even the next few hours, to focus on being present with one another, to take in the gift of our relationships, to enjoy the gift of connection. Shabbat Shalom.